And then share screen. Here we go. So we are in Sefer Yetzirah 1:9. First chapter, the 9th Mishnah, the 9th teaching in Sefer Yetzirah. All of chapter 1 is a discussion of the sefirot that are called the sefirot blima, the 10 sefirot without substance, or the 10 sefirot of nothingness, as Rabbi Kaplan translates it over here, the 10 sefirot of nothingness. All the entire chapter really is about this idea, the 10 sefirot of nothingness. What does it mean, the 10 sefirot of nothingness? It means there's two explanations of it. One, that a sefirah is comprised generally of lights and vessels, as we know. So generally, the concept of nothingness applies much more to the light than to the vessel, because the vessel is some kind of substance. It's that, even if it's a conceptual substance, in other words, it's not something physical, it's a spiritual substance. Nevertheless, it has dimensions, it has measurements. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a vessel. A vessel is something that has to have measurements. So generally, when we talk about the sefirot b'lima, some of the commentaries talk about the 10 sefirot in the light itself. In other words, 10 divisions within the light. There are other commentators that say we're talking about such a high level that at this level, even the vessels are completely nullified to the light, and therefore they are called blima, without substance, because even though they are vessels that have measurement, they have particular quality, a particular character, a particular algorithm, I suppose you could say. Nevertheless, those 10 sefirot do not have any physical substance or limitation that can be pointed to as a limitation per se. Anyway, we've been talking about this all along, all the 10 sefirot of nothingness. And now we go on to speak about a sort of on a higher dimension, this idea in somewhat higher dimensions, the origin and the source and the light and the life force within them. And that's what he goes on to say over here. One is the breath or the spirit of the living God. Now, I'll explain these terms a little bit later when we actually get into the explanation. But just for the translation now, one is the Ruach. The word Ruach can mean either, it means in modern Hebrew, it means wind, but it means the spirit or the breath of the living God. Baruch Mevorach, blessed and blessed. There's no word in English to explain these two. There's slightly different words in Hebrew. Baruch means blessed in himself, and Mevorach means blessed by others. So that's how you would translate that. So he says over here, blessed and benedicted is the name of the life of the worlds. Blessed is the name of the life of the worlds. I'll explain all this terminology soon. Kol v'ruach v'dibur, voice and breath and speech. Voice and breath and speech, and all of these together form what is called Ruach HaKodesh. What is sometimes he translates as the holy breath. I would personally rather call it the holy soul or the Holy Spirit. That's the general way to translate it. Okay, so keeping all of that in mind, let's now discuss what this Mishnah is talking about. First of all, there are two main commentaries on this Mishnah, or two main camps. One is the camp of the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who lived in the early 1500s in Israel, in the Galilee. And he maintains that this Mishnah starts to talk about the sefirah of keter, the highest of the sefirot. That's why it's called Achat Ruach Elokim Chaim. One spirit, or one is the breath of the living God, one is the spirit, one is the Ruach, one is the soul, or however you want to say it, of the living God, the consciousness of the living God. And he says that it refers to the sefirah of keter, the highest of the sefirot. However, according to the Ramban, that's Rabbi Moshe Nachmanides, Moshe ben Nachman lived in the 1300s, and Rabbi Chaim Vital, who also lived in the 1500s, was the chief disciple of the Arizal, and he gives over the Arizal's opinion. Here it is talking not about the sefirah of keter, but about the sefirah of chochmah. Although keter is the highest of the sefirot, chochmah is the first revelation of the sefirot, because keter is manifested, if you can say manifested, as transcendent. Keter is transcendent, whereas chochmah is the first revelation. So Rabbi Chaim Vital, following the Arizal, and the Ramban all say that this refers to the sefirah of chochmah, and we will explain that shortly. In Hasidic tracts, Hasidic explanations, what is brought into this paradigm over here, into this Mishnah, is the spirit of man, which draws down the sefirot into revelation. It draws down the sefirot into revelation, the spirit of man. And that's a vitally important part of this Mishnah, because now we start to involve what's called the avodah, or the service of man. What's man's position in all of this idea that we've been speaking about? So let's continue. He said that one is the breath of the living God, or one of this is the spirit of the living God. Again, according to the Pardes, this refers to keter. That's the Ramak. According to the Ramak, it refers to keter because it refers to the idea of Ruach, is what is called avir. Avir is the concept of air, as opposed to the word or is spelled aleph vav reish. Avir is spelled aleph vav yud reish. The yud shows that it's coming from a higher place, which is keter. So that is what and avir, air, is sort of this atmosphere rather than air per se. In other words, it's the ground upon which light is actually revealed. In other words, light is not revealed in a vacuum out in space. Light is not revealed per se, it's only reflected off things, but it looks dark, it looks black. Why? Because there's no air. So the air precedes the light, so to speak, and that's why the Ramak wants to maintain that we're talking here about keter. In any event, according to Rabbi Chaim Vital, according to the Ramban, as we explained before, we are talking here about chochmah. Why? Because the sefirot that we are talking about over here are the sefirot of the world of Atzilut. And the primary sefirah of the world of Atzilut is the sefirah of chochmah. The primary sefirah, when we talk about keter, that is the primary sefirah of the worlds of Adam Kadmon, of Adam Kadmon. Whereas when we're talking about chochmah, we're talking about Atzilut, and that's what we're talking about over here. Because when we talk about sefirot, even sefirot plima, generally we are talking about the idea of manifested sefirot in some way or another. Okay, and that's why he says it's called Ruach Elokim Chaim, the spirit of the living God, because chochmah is called the chochmah, the sefirah of life. HaChochmah techayeh ba'aleha. Chochmah gives life to those that possess it. And also chochmah is the beginning, Reshit chochmah yirat Hashem. The beginning is always chochmah. In any event, this also refers to, as I mentioned before, the spirit of man, who is the one who draws down the revelation of the sefirot. The sefirot in the process of creation are not revealed per se. They're manifested and they create, but they're not revealed as sefirot. They're not revealed as divine dimensions, as divine qualities. In other words, the divinity thereof is kind of hidden. That's up to man to reveal. That's what we attempt to do, is to reveal the godliness that is manifested in creation through the sefirot. Another way of putting it is another analogy that was used earlier in Sefer Yetzirah, which is the flame that comes out of the coal. How does the flame come out of the coal? By blowing on the coal, the flame bursts out of the coal. There's a flame in the coal to start off with. It's invisible or just barely visible. But when one actually blows on the coal, then the flame bursts into flame on top of the coal, above the coal, and you can actually see it. That is an analogy for the bringing down, for the revelation of the sefirot from above through the spirit of man. And that's how the sefirot hagenuzot, the 10 hidden, the 10 concealed sefirot, become 10 revealed sefirot in the world of Atzilut, which is through the agency of man doing the right thing. Okay. Now, how do you blow on the coal in order to, in other words, what's the analogy? Well, this is only an analogy. What's the analog? How do we understand this? First of all, the first thing is that it has to be with strength. You can't just blow sort of, half-heartedly. You have to blow hard. There has to be energy involved. There has to be power involved. One has to put oneself into it. And then the light from within, the fire from within the coal comes even outside of the coal. Same thing is true with us, with man. We have to put our energy into it, and we have to, it's not just half-hearted attempts, but there has to be a real dedication to the task of revealing the light. How is the light revealed? Primarily through speech. Just as thought is revealed through speech, so too the light of the sefirot is revealed through the proper speech. Now, what do we mean by proper speech? What we mean is the speech of Torah, speaking in words of Torah, speaking in verses. In other words, reading the verses, commenting on the verses, and studying Torah, studying the depths, the concepts, the ideas, basically the kind of thing that we're doing now in deeper and deeper levels, reveals deeper and higher and higher levels of light. As there's a verse that states like this, that that's a verse in Mishlei in Proverbs 4:22 that says like this, that ki chaim heim lamotz ehem, they are life for those who bring them out. In other words, those who bring them out in speech, those who bring out ideas into speech, bring life into the world. And that's the whole concept of Ruach, of this breath, this air. What is the air that a person exudes? If he exudes it in speech, then it's communicating. He's bringing out ideas, he's bringing out revelations into reality. And of course, this depends on what level that particular person is at. A person can say things which he doesn't understand and which he doesn't have a grasp of, and therefore there's very little revelation that comes through it. Sometimes I remember being in lectures and hearing lecturers just read their notes, and you get the feeling that maybe they didn't understand what they're reading so well, that kind of thing. Here, this is not supposed to be the case. One's supposed to grasp it, absorb it internally, and then externalize it through speech, through teaching, through just speaking it out, and so on and so forth. And of course, there were and still are, but certainly were in Jewish history, those who were so proficient at this and managed to reach so deeply into the essence of things that they actually had the power of performing miracles, even just through speech. We know this is the case with Moses and with most of the prophets, but they were not only the prophets, there were even some amongst the early sages, like called the Tanaim, which is first, second century sages, who were able to split a river just through speech. In other words, they stopped the river from flowing, and what was there flows down, and what was above is held back, and they were able to cross like that. There's a famous saying about Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, that he was one of those that did that. And there's many such miracles and miraculous events that happen through the power of man and the power of his speech. And that is, in fact, one of the things that prophecy is, in fact, all about. Prophecy is what? Prophecy is not just realizing something for yourself, but prophecy is expressing it outside, expressing the prophecy. Sometimes the prophecy is expressed in such a way that people don't understand it, and then the prophet has to explain it, or other sages have to explain what the prophet said. But nevertheless, prophecy is a revelation. That's what it's all about. And the purpose of it is revelation. It's not just revelation to the prophet. It's supposed to be revealed to the people in general. Okay, so that's why we also talk about the concept of Baruch u'Mevorach, blessed and benedicted, as he translates it. blessed and benedicted. I'm not sure that there's much of a difference between those in English, but as I mentioned before, there's definitely a difference in Hebrew, that Baruch means blessed in himself, and Mavorach means blessed by others. But the whole concept of blessed, what does blessing mean? Blessing means actually to bring down. There's an expression, hamavrich et hagefen, to bring down the vine, the tendril, and plant it in the earth. It's a Mishnah, to plant it in Kiloim. You bring down how is a vine extended? You take one tendril of the vine, you plant it in the earth, and that leaving a little bit up and at the end, and that grows into a new vine. So that the concept of Baruch is to bring down and to implant in the world so that there can be blessing from above, blessing from the higher vine to the lower vine until the vine itself becomes independent. This is, of course, an analogy for the way things work. When blessing is brought down into the world, then it expands and it blesses further. In other words, if it's planted properly and it's tended and nurtured in the right way, then the blessing expands in all kinds of directions. However, in general, we're talking here about a light that is not a new light. In general, when we talk about something being brought down, it's brought down from its source. In other words, it's already there present in the source. It's not a new light. It's new to the place that it's found in, but it's not actually a new light. However, there is also a concept of blessing, which is from the essence, which comes from the essence. In other words, it's something that was not ever revealed before. There are certain blessings that can reveal new light that was never manifested in creation before. It's called Or Chadash, the new light that was never before manifested in creation. And that happens irregularly in general, but on very special occasions, that new light is brought down. Every year on the Jewish New Year, there's a new light that was never before in creation that is brought down and then becomes manifested through our actions during the year, during what it is that we are supposed to do. And that's why God is called the life of the world. What is the life of the world? The life of the world is that life that comes to enliven and to manifest itself within the world as a manifestation of godliness, as a manifestation of existence. In other words, that existence is, that continued existence of the world is a hidden aspect of divinity, but that can be revealed as divinity in and of itself. So it's called the life of the world. And of course, it's only the life of the world, and it's not the essential life. It's, in other words, it's not the essential revelation, but it's the revelation that can be brought into and within creation. We now get on to the concept of voice and breath and speech. That is the holy breath, or that is Ruach HaKodesh, that is divine inspiration. And he goes on to explain, the commentaries go on to explain as follows and say like this. We say that there are different levels of prophecy. There's the level called voice, there's a level called breath, and there's a level called speech. As I said before, the most important one for the world is speech, but there's levels that come before speech. Before speech, there's breath, and before breath, there's voice. In other words, sound is already present, and then the sound, in order to be brought down, that's brought down by Ruach, by breath. And then eventually it comes out of the mouth in terms of speech. Now, what is prophecy really? We've discussed prophecy on a number of occasions. There's 5 different levels of Ruach HaKodesh that we're talking about over here. We've spoken about them before. If anyone wants to look it up in greater detail, you can go to Kabbalah online and look for the article of 5 levels of consciousness, or 5 levels of soul. And you can see it over there. 5 levels of prophecy. It's explained over there. The lowest level of prophecy being dreams. And then there's there's prophecy that comes through angelic revelation. There's prophecy that comes through Eliyahu, Elijah. Elijah reveals prophecy to certain people, and not only Elijah. Elijah was the teacher of the Arizal. He was also the teacher of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The teacher of the Baal Shem Tov was someone named Achia Hashiloni. Achia Hashiloni was one of the prophets of the Bible, a very high-level prophet, and he was the primary spiritual teacher of the Baal Shem Tov. That was Achia Hashiloni. And then there is the essence of the soul. When the essence of the soul becomes revealed to a person and teaches him that which he could not achieve by himself. And then there's also called Ibur Nishmas HaTzadik, when the soul of a tzaddik comes into a person, the soul of someone higher, like the soul of Achia Shiloni, the soul of Elijah the prophet, that comes into a person and uses that person, so to speak, as a vehicle for revelation. So there's 5 different levels of prophecy, but in any event, obviously prophecy is not something that is given lightly or given to everybody, but divine inspiration can be given to everybody. It depends essentially on where a person is holding. In other words, if they're dedicated to the goal of revealing godliness in the world, if they're dedicated to God, essentially, then it is possible that they will get from time to time the idea of prophecy, or the idea of divine inspiration, which is revealed very often as new insights into concepts in Torah. That's how it's essentially revealed. And that's what's called Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach HaKodesh, the divine spirit that moves a person. It's the spirit that is drawn down from the level which is called holiness. Either chochmah or keter, as we mentioned in the beginning. There are those that explain that Ruach HaKodesh is relevant to the sefirot of Malchut as well. Some commentaries explain it that way. But in any event, all of them are bound together because Malchut is the power of speech. Malchut peh, Torah Shabbat peh karinan la. Malchut is called the mouth. It's the power of speech. But in the power of speech, there has to be the revelation of chochmah. There has to be wisdom. And within wisdom, it's directed and guided by keter. In other words, chochmah is guided by keter. So truly in speech, in divine speech, in speech of prophecy, in speech of divine inspiration, you have all 3 levels. You have keter, you have chochmah, and you have malchut. And it can happen that therefore a person who is really dedicated to revealing godliness in the world can have secrets of the Torah revealed to him, or din lo razeh Torah. The secrets of Torah can become revealed to such a person, and therefore it is really possible for everybody to achieve this kind of thing, just depending on how much you give yourself over, how much how much dedication a person has, how much sincerity and truthfulness and so on and so forth a person has. And obviously the revelation is going to be each according to his or her particular level. All right. That is the end of that particular Mishnah. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer. You can write it in the chat, or you can write it alternatively in an email. You can send it to me and I'll answer it some other time. All right, thank you, Justin. Yeah, new light. Yeah. So there's light that was already manifested in creation, from the beginning of creation, and it can be from the very highest level, but once it's manifested, it's already there. That can be drawn down from its source, but it's not called new light because it was already manifested. Even if it was never manifested at this level, but it was manifested at a higher level. It's nevertheless manifested. It's possible on occasions, as I said, the Jewish New Year is one of these occasions, where an entirely new paradigm, an entirely new light or algorithm is revealed that was never before in creation. It was maybe implicitly implicit, but it was never explicit. I don't know if you can say implicitly implicit, but it was, in other words, it wasn't. It was certainly there in, so to speak, if we use this terminology, it was certainly there in God's mind. if you want to put it that way. It was there, but it was not in God's speech, so to speak. The world was created through speech. God said there shall be light, and there was light, and so on and so forth. You can look through the 10 utterances through which creation was brought about. The first utterance is actually the first word of the Torah, Bereshit, in the beginning, which is not really an utterance. It's the utterance in thought, but it's still there. It's manifested in thought. New light comes from a higher level than even that, a higher level than the beginning. It comes from that which has no beginning. That's where the new light comes from. It's a new paradigm that's always brought into revelation every year. Hope that explains the concept of new light or chadash. I think, yeah, do I just subscribe to a particular view regarding if the sefirot, if it is keter or chochmah? I think it's both. I think you can explain it both ways, and both ways work. And in fact, not only can you explain it both ways, but it is both manifestations. Because once chochmah has been revealed, that's the origin, that's the source, that's the way it was. In its source, it becomes revealed. Then what's beyond, in other words, the origin of the source, the makor, can also become revealed. That's keter. So the Mishnah is talking equally about both of them. And not only can it be explained in both ways, but it should be explained in both ways, because really, when one reaches the fullness and the completeness of the cycle of 10, then one manifests already or draws down a higher, from the word baruch, to draw down, a higher level of light already, and that's the concept of keter. Any other questions? Okay, folks, we'll leave it at that. I think that probably tomorrow there won't be a class. Let's assume that there won't be, but if there is, if I decide to make one, instead of going to the gathering, there's a Hasidic gathering tomorrow night. Instead of doing that, I will probably, instead of doing that, I may give a class, but I probably will not. So there you go. I'll let you know. All the best. Have a great week, great weekend. See you all. You're welcome. Wendy, I haven't forgotten that you want to talk. I hope next week works for you, or Sunday or next week we'll talk. All the best.